Descend now, if you dare, into the icy marrow of forgotten history where rhymes are not innocent, and lullabies carry daggers in their verses. Tonight, we unearth the cryptic shadow of Mary, Mary, quite contrary an Old English nursery chant, echoing since 1744 like a whisper behind a child's bedroom walls, sweet on the surface, but beneath, writhing with secrets, soaked in blood, twisted in time. It was in the brittle pages of Tom Thumb's pretty songbook that the rhyme first drew breath, a breath that reeked of something. Older, fouler, a thing that smiled with dead lips. To most, it is a child's tune, but peel back the rhyme, let the ink bleed, and you'll find the pulse of something darker. A story marbled with torture, betrayal, and slow, deliberate murder. So buckle in, darlings, because the truth isn't gentle, and tonight's tale is not meant to cradle you to sleep. Nursery rhymes, they are not what they seem. Far from the giggles of childhood and the innocence we pretend to believe in. These sing-song verses were born in smoke-filled alleys, in taverns thick with secrets, in castles where blood pooled beneath velvet carpets. They are not child's play, they are code. In a time when few could read, when paper was a privilege and truth was a death sentence, rhymes became a whispering weapon, a sly, melodic dagger that cut deep into the flesh of politics and scandal. And Mary, quite contrary. Oh, she is no exception, she is the rule. But here's the thing. No one really knows who Mary was. No one's sure which shadow wore the crown beneath that name. Many theories flicker like candle flames in a long abandoned chapel. But one stands tall above the rest, the tale of Mary, Queen of Scots. Her reign stretched from 1542 to 1567, a crimson-soaked chapter in Scotland's grim tapestry, a Catholic queen, draped in silks and suspicion, thrust into the teeth of a Protestant storm. And somewhere in that storm, a rhyme was born, delicate as lace, deadly as a blade hidden in a child's cradle. Within the rhyme's tender cadence, how does your garden grow, lurks something deeper, something veiled. It's more than a question of petals and soil. It may well be a reflection of Mary's dominion, her Scotland fertile, wild, and bleeding beneath her touch. Silver bells, not the kind that ring joyfully in a child's hand, but the solemn chimes of Catholic cathedrals, echoing through stone corridors, echoing through time, tolling not for celebration, but for penance. And cockle shells, perhaps not from the sea at all, but a cruel jest carved into her reputation, a mocking nod to a gown gifted by a French king, a dress too ornate, too Catholic, too dangerous in the eyes of the reformers who watched her every move with sharpened smiles. Even the line "pretty maids all in a row" hides whispers of her court, 4 loyal ladies, silent sentinels who followed Mary from France back into the haunted halls of Scotland. But not all versions of the rhyme end so politely. Earlier renditions carry a darker sigh. Sing cockles, all sorrow, and that is where the story begins to rot. Because cockles, in another tongue, carry a different poison, a cuckold, a man deceived, a husband raising ghosts not his own. And suddenly, the rhyme is no longer about flowers or faith, but about betrayal, about bloodlines blurred, about a queen with a hunger deeper than duty. Mary's life, it shimmered at first, like a fairy tale stitched in gold thread, a royal dream unfolding beneath cathedral arches. She wed Francis II, boy king of France, and for a moment, the stars aligned until they didn't. Fate, cruel, silent, and precise, plucked Francis from her arms within 2 years, leaving Mary alone, adrift, returning to a homeland colder than before, a kingdom she barely recognized, and one that watched her every move like a wolf at the tree line. Then came Lord Darnley Henry Stuart, a man of fire, of beauty, a creature who walked like a prince and roared like a storm. Their union wasn't love. Not really, it was a detonation. From the moment their eyes locked, a dangerous chemistry ignited, a bond forged in ambition, power, and the poison of unmet expectations. Mary, ever regal, was willing to share the throne, but Darnley wanted more. He wanted the crown in his grip. The queen bent to his will, and when she would not kneel, something in him fractured. What began in passion soon decayed into suspicion, resentment, and hate. Darnley, once the flame in her eyes, withered into a shadow, drunk on power and wine. He chased pleasure like a man fleeing his own reflection, spilling himself into beds that weren't hers, into arms that whispered sweeter lies. But it wasn't just women, there was someone else. David Rizzio. A name that slithered through court corridors like a serpent in silk. Young, magnetic, always at Mary's side, her secretary, her confidant, and perhaps more. Some say Darnley and Rizzio were once lovers, entwined in secret rooms where the candles burned low, but that bond, whatever it once was, crumbled beneath jealousy's crushing boot when Rizzio's gaze turned toward the queen, and Mary, with her swelling belly and sovereign pride, became the center of a deadly rumor that the child inside her wasn't Darnley's at all. The whispers grew louder. The walls leaned in to listen, and Darnley, humiliated, enraged, cornered by shame, decided that if he couldn't reclaim her heart, he would tear it out instead. So the plot was laid not with grace, but with grit, hammered together by desperation and the cold hands of men who mistook cruelty for justice. Darnley, with his father a man as bitter and scheming as he wove a net of treachery meant to trap Rizzio and break Mary, to rip apart what dignity she still clung to and crown Darnley king not through honor, but through horror. The date was March 9th, 1566. Holyrood House Palace stood silent under the moon, its windows flickering like eyes in a fever dream. Inside, the queen dined with friends, her laughter still full of light, and beside her, Rizzio, unaware that the walls themselves had already betrayed him. 80 conspirators, cloaked in the shadow of Lord Ruthven's command, moved like death through the palace corridors. Steel glinted beneath velvet. Their boots whispered against ancient stone. And then the doors burst open. Ruthven entered first, clad in armor, his face pale with illness but burning with malice. He raised a trembling finger toward Rizzio, accusing him in a voice like gravel of dishonoring the queen. Mary stood. Fury flared in her like a tempest, but diplomacy still danced on her tongue. She pleaded, reasoned, begged Ruthven to wait, to let the Lords of Parliament decide. But reason had already drowned. Her words fell like feathers against iron soft, ignored, swept aside by a blade already half drawn. Ruthven's hand moved, and with it, the room collapsed into madness. Mary rose, a storm clothed in royalty, her fury a desperate shield between Rizzio and the pack of wolves descending upon him. He clung to her skirts, a man suffocating in terror, his eyes wide with the knowledge that this was the end. The queen's companions sprang to her defense, their cries colliding with the clash of steel. But it was no use. Rizzio was torn from her side, dragged screaming into the adjoining chamber, his pleas vanishing into the void. Mary, the Queen of Scotland, the most powerful woman in the land, could only watch, a pistol pressed to her pregnant belly, a silent threat humming against the heartbeat of her unborn son. And then came the music not of flutes or harpsichords, but of knives. 56 times they stabbed him. 56 notes in a symphony of slaughter. Each plunge of the blade a verse in a grim lullaby that echoed through the palace halls. When it was over, Rizzio's lifeless body, stripped and bloodied, was cast like refuse down the palace stairs. A mockery of his former grace. And yet, this was not the end, only the beginning of a descent far more chilling. Time, relentless and cruel, marched forward, but it did not wash away the blood. Nearly a year later, another body would fall, this time. Lord Darnley himself. It was February 10th, 1567, a cold morning in Edinburgh, where the mist crawled low over cobblestones and secrets curled like smoke beneath the eaves of Kirk O'Field. Darnley, weakened by illness, had taken refuge there, but the walls that sheltered him were already being shaped into a tomb, somewhere in the darkness. A plan unfurled, quiet as a breath, merciless as winter. The silence shattered. An explosion tore through the heart of the city, ripping stone and soul apart, a fiery bloom against the night sky that left the provost's house in ruin. And yet, when the smoke cleared, when the debris was sifted and the cries faded, Darnley's corpse was found not within the rubble, but lying still in a nearby garden. His body untouched by flame, his skin unburned. Too intact, too clean. Suspicion slithered in immediately. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He hadn't died in the explosion. No, that fire had been for show, a grand and terrible curtain drawn across a quieter, crueler truth. Darnley's neck bore signs of strangulation, his face locked in a grimace that spoke of betrayal, of recognition, perhaps the final. Horrifying realization that someone he knew had sealed his fate. Near the bodies, a rope, a chair. Clues scattered like breadcrumbs in a nightmare. Had he tried to escape, lowered himself out a window, only to be dragged back into the dark? Or had he run, barefoot and desperate, into the garden, only to be caught, his final breath stolen beneath the weight of unseen hands? Some say the explosion was nothing but a veil, a smoke-screen to cloak a murder too intimate to leave behind. Mary mourned publicly. Properly, 40 days of weeping and veils. But Edinburgh's streets were not so easily convinced. The taverns hissed with whispers. The alleys grew thick with doubt. Had she known? Had she watched? Had she helped? And in that fog of suspicion, a name emerged, dark, sharp, and coiled with menace. James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. A man of ambition, a creature who thrived in shadow. His hands stained with gunpowder, his footsteps traced through treachery. They said it was he who provided the explosives that tore through Kirk O'Field. He whose men were seen skulking near the blast site. And when they found a pair of shoes bloody, abandoned, bearing the crest of one of Bothwell's supporters, the whispers thickened into shouts. Placards were nailed to wooden beams, leaflets flung like curses into the wind. They named them both Mary and Bothwell, accused them of more than murder. They accused them of love, not the kind sung in ballads, but the kind that festers in the dark. Born from hunger and sharpened by mutual need. An affair sordid, clandestine, woven with fire and blood. And then just weeks later, on a lonely road between Linlithgow and Edinburgh, the story twisted again. April 24th, 1567. The wind was bitter that day. Carrying more than just the scent of rain, it carried a warning. Mary rode beneath gray skies, unaware that ahead, Bothwell waited not with roses, but with 800 men. He stopped her carriage, eyes smoldering with something unspoken, and whispered of danger, of enemies circling, of the need to escape, to be safe with him. But safety was a lie. Dunbar Castle loomed in the distance, a fortress cloaked in stone and silence. and when its gates closed behind her, they did not close gently. That night, what happened inside those walls is known only to Mary, Bothwell, and the shadows that clung to their footsteps. Some say he took her by force. Others say she consented. But consent twisted by fear is no consent at all. What is known is this: soon after, Bothwell cast off his wife like an old coat. A divorce rushed through the courts. Papers still warm with fresh ink when Mary stood beside him once more. A bride again, this time to her captor. May 15th, 1567. Just 3 months after Darnley's death. The bells tolled not in mourning, but in union. A union soaked in scandal, and bound not by love, but by the chains of survival or ambition, or both. Historians have argued for centuries was Mary a pawn, dragged helpless into a web of male power, her will broken, her crown stolen one kiss, one dagger at a time. Or was she the spider, calculating, cunning, trading Darnley's life for a promise of protection, for the fierce embrace of a man who could command armies and crush enemies in her name? The truth, like everything else in this tale, remains blurred, a painting smeared by time and rumor. The fragments we have are just that, shards of stained glass from a cathedral long destroyed. All we know is that the marriage divided the kingdom like a fault line. Her people once enamored, now enraged. Whispers became protest, and protest became rebellion. And through it all, the rhyme endured. Mary, Mary. Quite contrary. How does your garden grow with silver bells, and cockle shells, and pretty maids all in a row? But now the garden looked different, didn't it? The silver bells perhaps not bells at all, but shackles. Instruments of pain clinking through dungeon halls. The cockle shells not sea-born ornaments, but twisted symbols of humiliation. Jeers sewn into the seams of royal gowns. And the pretty maids. Maybe they weren't maids at all. Maybe they were graves. Because there is another Mary draped in blood and legend. Etched not with scandal, but with fire. Mary Tudor. Bloody Mary, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, a queen born from broken promises, raised in the shadow of her father's wrath and her mother's exile. When she took the throne, it wasn't peace she sought, it was restoration, retribution. The Church of England, the Great Schism. The Protestant tide that had drowned her mother's legacy, she would reverse it all, even if it meant turning England into a pyre. She was contrary not in whim, but in war. A queen who prayed with one hand and lit the stake with the other. And so the rhyme took on another shape. How does your garden grow? With graves, with ash, with the scent of burning flesh beneath the roses. Silver bells' thumbscrews, perhaps, tightening with every scream. Cockle shells' instruments of mutilation, whispers of cruelty behind closed cathedral doors. And the pretty maids in a row. They may have walked to the maiden not a woman, but a blade. The guillotine's cold cousin, death, dressed in wood and steel. But even this theory, as blood-soaked as it is, shivers beneath the weight of doubt. Because Mary Tudor, for all her fury, favored fire, not racks or screws or slicing machines. She burned heretics at the stake public, holy, absolute, no silver bells, no cockle shells, no metal jaws clicking shut behind dungeon walls. So then, what is the truth? Perhaps it is both Mary's, or neither. Perhaps the rhyme is a mirror, reflecting whichever queen we dare to remember, the vengeful flame, or the betrayed heart. Perhaps it's a curse, repeating itself with every frightened child's tongue, binding the listener to the sins of the past. Because in the end, history does not whisper. It screams through lullabies, through legends, through words sown in rhyme and watered with blood. Mary. Mary. Quite contrary, she was never just a nursery rhyme. She was a storm, a blade, a question that still hasn't been answered. So tell us which version haunts you more. The seductress draped in velvet and secrets, or the zealot with fire in her breath. Or perhaps you have your own theory, waiting to claw its way into the light. Drop it in the comments, we're listening. And if you felt the chill of this tale, press that like button, share the darkness, and tell us which rhyme we should unravel next. Because this garden of riddles has roots that go deep, and there are still shadows left to dig up. Until then, keep listening for what hides beneath the surface. Keep walking down the halls that creak at night. And above all, keep feeding that insatiable curiosity. We'll see you in the next story.